Sarah, how
Hi.
are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Yeah. Can you hear me?
I can. Excellent. Happy Sunday.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Adi, how are
much
you?
for, oh, sorry.
Not.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to
Oh,
you and for reading the book.
thanks so much for coming. Oh my goodness. I can't wait to dig into this. It was oh, it was such a treat. It was it was so fun. I
Oh, good.
I always like when a book is a surprise, right? You kind of go and you're like, okay, I kind of have some sense of like what's happening. I always love when I'm surprised. When you kind of know, you're like, okay, I knew this was kind of gonna happen. So this was fun because I was like, oh wow, I was not expecting it. So it was a nice ride.
Oh, good. I mean, that's wonderful to hear because when you're writing a book, like you kind of lose track of what's surprising or not,
Yeah.
because in your head, you know it in your head and you're reading it 1,000 times and changing it 1,000 times. So it's always like, is this going to surprise anybody else? So that makes me really happy to hear that.
Good. Well, folks are going to start sort of tumbling in. We're very casual here. Like I said, folks will kind of tumble in, and then we'll take questions and from folks, and folks will just kind of jump in at a time that sort of makes sense to them. Hi, Hazel. I think you're on mute. Are you talking, Hazel? You're on mute.
Hi.
Oh, there you are. I think Ashley just joined here as well.
Yes.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi,
Can you
Ashley.
hear us?
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi,
Happy
Ashley.
Sunday. Happy
How are
Sunday.
y'all?
Good.
Y'all want to see the pup of the day really quick?
Yeah, Sarah. So Ashley is a groomer, and so usually each month she shows us a couple of her her littles that she's working on.
Oh, that's so sweet. Oh.
She's about to look really different in a minute. So
Is that a
I'm gonna-
cockapoo?
she's a Bichon. We just cut her short. She's an old lady now. I've been grooming her for forever.
I came at the right time.
You did.
I'm so glad I didn't miss that pup.
So cute, so cute. All right, well, we will go ahead and get started. Like I said, I know folks will probably kind of join as they can. How's everybody doing? How has everybody's month of August been?
Great, wonderful.
Good. Happy to hear that. Nicole, you're back in school. Classes are
Yeah,
back.
we started 2 weeks ago now, and so very busy right now. But it's been great. I have a really great class this year. I teach 4th grade, and yeah, I'm real excited for this year. But I have to say, I think I read this whole book in like the last week for the most part, which normally I'm pretty on top of it, but I was so busy preparing for school to start that I was like, oh my gosh. So I was nervous I wasn't going to finish in time, but I did. I'm very glad.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Adi, it's good to see you again. So happy that you can join us. We missed seeing your face.
I'm happy to be back. It's a great book to start
Hi.
coming back with. Hi, Hazel.
Wonderful. All right. Well, Sarah, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to jump into the book, but I wanted to first kind of give you a chance to sort of introduce yourself and how you got into writing. We always find that, or at least I always find it really fascinating how folks kind of got into writing, if there was something that sort of piqued your interest and you said, yeah, I want to try this, or just kind of a little bit about how your journey has been. We would love to hear that if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Of course. Thank you again for inviting me. I'm super excited to talk about Girl One. My name is Sara Flannery Murphy. I was actually homeschooled as a kid, kind of all the way like K through 12. And since I didn't really have, a classroom to go to, we ended up spending like a lot of time in libraries. That kind of became like, the, I guess, institution that like I was really familiar with as a kid in the absence of like schools. And yeah, I was completely in love with libraries. Like I always felt so happy there, like kind of overjoyed. And I still do, to be clear, like walking into a library is still like, walking into a candy store or something. It's always a very exciting experience. And so, yeah, I guess I was like that like bookworm kid who kind of lost herself in books a lot of the time. I just kind of would read, I think, more than like any other activity. I just loved it. Like there was such a joy of, the joy of like connection and finding these stories. And since I was like a very, very shy kid, I think there was something really lovely about having these books where I was able to kind of get into other people's mindsets and experience other people's thoughts and journeys in a way that was like a little easier for me than, actually talking to people at that age. And so then as I grew older, I kind of held on to that love of reading. And I guess it kind of made sense to me to try it myself. I remember like being a kid, just sitting at like my little word processor, like writing out fantasy novels and sci-fi novels, and discovered that actually writing kind of gave me a very similar experience as reading, except that like I could kind of control what was going on, which in some ways was more fun and in some ways was more pressure, but it was always very exciting. And I pursued it in undergrad. I think it took me a little bit to kind of come to it. Like I remember maybe being interested in like studio art at the beginning, which was, I think, more me wanting to see myself as a glamorous artist. And then I had to realize like, maybe I need to just pursue writing instead, because I feel like that's just where I feel the most at home. I did end up after undergrad pursuing an MFA program, which was a really lovely experience. And I met a lot of really wonderful people. There was like just like a lot of space to write. I feel like back then I was in my early 20s, and I was a bit intimidated by the thought of writing a novel. It kind of felt like something that I just didn't know how to stick with one project for that many pages. I was more comfortable writing shorter things. And it actually wasn't until I ended my MFA program and had my first son, actually, that I kind of felt like there was like a sense of maybe having my first child kind of made me think about the other things that I had wanted to achieve or things that I have been too nervous to approach yet. So I started writing my debut novel, and was very lucky to have that published. And Girl One is my second book. So yeah, I think that's kind of maybe a too thorough, but like that's a little bit of a rundown of my journey from childhood to here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. I wonder, as we were talking, I was wondering your transition from being homeschooled to then going to college. How was that? How was that for you? Or do you think that might have impacted your decision to pursue writing?
That was an interesting experience. I feel like I had to catch up on a lot of things that most people would have gone through when they were much younger. Maybe transitioning to college is a little bit strange for everybody, because you're like, well, you aren't always 18, but a lot of people are around that age range and like kind of trying to figure themselves out as people, like moving away from your family life maybe. So I know it can be a big transition for a lot of people, but for me, I think it was just very chaotic because I just was suddenly thrust into this system that I was completely unfamiliar with. I had to learn how to navigate all these social situations. I had to learn how to navigate like teachers' expectations. I'm not sure that homeschooling affected my decision to be a writer in a huge way, except that maybe I was just given that kind of freedom, for better or for worse, to just kind of dive into whatever interest I had, which means that like my education can be very uneven, but I was allowed to kind of write silly novels all day as a child. So I think that kind of encouraged me in that direction.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing. So let's dig into girl one. And as everybody here already knows, I'm a sucker for like a beautiful cover. Like whoever says covers don't sell books, completely wrong in my opinion. Um, so would you mind telling us a little bit about kind of the inspiration behind the cover? I mean, I think it's, first of all, I just think it's really pretty. The cover kind of stands out, and you're going in, a library or bookstore. To me, those are sort of the things that really stand out. I'm like, oh, that's an interesting cover or color, or it sort of, kind of stands out to me because there's so many books and I get overwhelmed very quickly. So can you tell us a little bit about the process of choosing this cover and how you landed on it?
Honestly, this was the first cover they showed me, and I loved it right away. So I feel like all credit for this goes to the designer, who I think she actually designed the cover for Luster, which is an incredibly, like, one of the prettiest covers I've ever seen. Like, I love owning that book, not just because it's amazing, but because the cover is so gorgeous. So when they showed me this and I realized, like, oh, wait a second, that's the same designer, I was really excited. I think that, I mean, one thing that I really love about it is being able to see some of the little kind of nods to the story inside the cover. Like, I feel like there's sort of the appearance of an eye, which I really, really loved. Just kind of like the lace work of like the DNA strands, I thought was really cool. So again, this was like all somebody else, but I absolutely love book covers. I think being a book cover designer would be such an incredible job. So I was really excited and really grateful when I saw it.
Oh, good. That's got to be a good feeling to say this fits with, this fits the feeling of the book, and I think it goes well with it. So that's got to be a good feeling to get that.
It is, yeah.
Good. Well, let's jump into the book itself. It's a very interesting topic. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about how you even landed on centering a book around this topic of really kind of women being able to procreate without men. So if you could talk about that a little bit, I think that'd be really interesting.
Yeah, of course. It's actually an idea that I had for a while. It was when I was taking a college course that was called The History of the Body, which just covered like all the different ways that we interact with our own bodies, that we use our bodies to interact with the world, all this, like, I don't know, just throughout history. I mean, it covered like fashion and diet and of course reproduction. So it was a really fascinating class because, as you can imagine, like, that covers a huge amount of territory. And thinking about reproduction it was probably the first time that I really thought about how reproduction has been more mysterious to people throughout history. Like, I have grown up in this world in which, like, my parents could explain kind of the general process to me when I was like a little kid, or like, a younger kid. But that was definitely not always the standard. There's so much about it that, without having the medical technology, the ability to see what's going on, some aspects of it are very visible and obvious, but others are quite mysterious to people, I think. And I was really struck by reading about how in the past, I feel like there were some philosophers and scientists who were trying to kind of figure out what was going on and create a narrative about it. And I mean, I have to credit them because that couldn't have been very easy, but I feel like there were some people like Plutarch and Aristotle who seemed to really want like the father's role to be like the most important role in this whole process, to kind of make the mother's role feel very secondary, like, oh, she's kind of part of this, but like not really. So there was this theory that I ran across that the father is the one who provides like the sort of humanity and the soul of the child. And so if a woman would reproduce by herself, this resulting fetus, this baby, would have like no like humanity. And in my head, when I read that, I was just like, oh, that would be like a really interesting origin story for people who have like superhuman abilities, for people who maybe are seen as both powerful but like not quite human. Like that would be a wonderful way to kind of take this idea that I think was meant to put women and mothers like in a kind of secondary role, and maybe draw a little bit more on the power of that. So it was an idea that I had a very long time ago, and I was always very nervous about writing it because it is kind of like a little bit of a thorny idea. And I was like, well, how do I take something like parthenogenesis and make it feel like exciting or accessible? So it took a really long time to figure out exactly how to approach it. And this is, this is what I landed on, but that was like the original idea.
Yeah, fascinating. There's so much I learned just kind of reading this book. There was a lot of like off turns on like Google searching and wait a minute, what does this mean? And looking into animals that could reproduce on their own, and I would just went down the rabbit hole. So it's very very interesting. I'll open up the floor because I don't want to take over the entire questioning section. But so if there are questions or comments, feel free to jump in, chime in. You can put it in the comments, chat box, however you guys want to jump in is totally fine. Perfect. Okay, I will continue on, and you guys can jump in as you see fit. So I want to start kind of with the relationship between Josephine and Margaret. So that's kind of where we start, with Margaret being missing and Josephine sort of starting on her journey a little bit. Can you tell, as I read the book, it's apparent to me that kind of the relationship between Margaret and Josephine, but also I think maybe mothers and their children in general, right, is kind of front and center in this book. Was that your intent, is to sort of base it on that kind of relationship? Or can you tell us a little bit about what your thought process was there?
It was a lot about mothers and daughters. And also, I think it evolved a little bit to be about to be about like the role of the father as well, which feels a little bit weird since the entire point of the book is like to write about parthenogenesis, in which there isn't a father. But I think it made me think a lot, not just about the role that mothers have towards their children, but the way that mothers are kind of perceived and written about a lot of the time. I really wanted to explore like the way that Josephine doesn't really look up to her mother in a lot of ways, that she kind of diminishes or overlooks her role in her life, and sort of idolizes this father figure in her life who's, very absent, but to her feels very, very powerful. And like throughout the journey, she kind of comes to see her mother in this entirely different way, including the fact that she maybe missed out a lot on who her mother was, because she was so quick to like kind of turn her mom into a more boring person than she truly was, like somebody sort of in the background of her life, like somebody that she would grow up and away from, and not somebody that she aspired to be like. So I think, that was probably at the heart of it, just the way that I think, kind of perceive moms in different narratives, where they often have this role where they're sort of like very important in childhood, and then maybe you sort of grow beyond them. I wanted to explore the ways that particularly women like perceive their moms, and so I think it kind of necessarily was at the beginning of the story, like this idea of mothers and daughters.
Mm-hmm. And Ashley wrote in the comments about Orphan Black. I have not seen that. Is that, has anybody on here seen that? I've not seen that show. I guess it's a show, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of the themes in the book reminded me a lot of Orphan Black. So I was just wondering if anybody else had seen that and was like thinking along those same lines.
Huh. Is it like a series, or what's sort of the basis behind it?
It's like one of those shows that Amazon makes where there's multiple seasons of it, but it does deal with cloning, but specifically of women that are made to be superhero women and that are based off of one genome. So
Got
it's
Interesting. No, I haven't
Wow.
seen it. That sounds really cool. So we start with, like I said, Josephine sort of looking for her mother under a little bit of a serious circumstances, and then she runs into, Tom. And pretty quickly, I remember thinking when I was first reading about Tom, I was like, man, she kind of started to trust him pretty quickly. Was that intentional on your part, or that relationship between Josephine and Tom? What was sort of the thought process behind that, and how to develop that?
That was a very hard dynamic to get right. Having her trust him in the beginning was really, really difficult to pull off, actually, because, I wanted there to be a sense of adventure and like kind of camaraderie between them. But I also realized, like, here is this young woman whose mother just went missing under very bizarre circumstances, and like here's this man who seems to know a little bit too much about her, and it's tricky to kind of have protagonists who are curious and adventurous enough to keep the momentum of the plot going,
Yeah.
and yet aren't just like jumping fully into situations that kind of are unrelatable, because as a reader you're just like, why would you do that? So that was a difficult dynamic. I think I was kind of trying to explore too the ways that maybe Josie was very, very quick to like trust him in a certain way just because he was a man, and she kind of had that inherent sense that he was who he said he was in a certain way. But that was a very tricky part of the story to write, and there were like quite a few chapters where I had to fine tune and just draft and redraft their initial meeting to kind of get them onto the road together.
Yeah, it was interesting because I remember thinking when she first started trusting Tom, I thought, wow, she's really trusting him. And then I think the way the story flowed for me, it just made sense. Like, it just was like, yeah, absolutely. Like, they're going on the road, they're going to find, where our mother is, they're going to uncover this mystery. And so I do think it ended up flowing very nicely, right? It ended up making complete sense. And I think, right, as you talked about kind of protagonists and kind of taking chances, right? That's typically, I think where the good parts of the story come from, right? You have a protagonist who makes a decision that maybe you wouldn't have made, right? Maybe you and I wouldn't have made, but man, does it make the story that much more interesting, right? Because they did that thing that maybe some of us were like, oh, I don't know, maybe that's a little risky, right? And then look at kind of the rewards that they kind of get in the end. So I did like how their relationship kind of progressed. As for some of the other women, so there was a great, there were a ton of, well, not a ton of other women, but there were the other sets of mothers and daughters that we sort of met along the way. As you were developing those mother-daughter relationships and those characters, where'd you get the inspiration for them, right? Because I feel like the relationships were really pretty different, right? Between, Josephine and her mom had a certain relationship, but some of the other mothers and daughters were a lot closer and lived, some of them lived, really nice lives, as opposed to Josephine, as far as financially. Josephine and her mother, were sort of off the grid, didn't really want to be bothered. So how did you kind of come up with how to kind of work those relationships in and make them different enough where we got, a good variety of women in relationships?
Yep. That was another thing that took a lot of planning and drafting. some of the mother-daughter pairs were pretty distinct in my mind from the beginning. I think that Bonnie and Deb, who are the ones who have sort of capitalized off their weird origin story and used it to kind of have a more financially stable life. They were very vivid in my head from the beginning because I thought, well, if you come from this very strange background, there are going to be people who just want to go off the grid and hide and have nothing to do with it. And there are going to be other people who are like, you know, I want to talk about this, like, even if it's a very different sanitized version of what happened.
Yeah.
I think that I wanted to use each mother-daughter pair in a slightly different way, maybe to show Josie like different aspects of how that had affected them and how it could have affected the mother-daughter relationship. You know, there are some mothers and daughters who ended up becoming part of a larger family again, others who stayed very, very close-knit for better or for worse. So just trying to use each one to hopefully both reveal a little bit more about the homestead's history and how this affected the women moving forward. You know, because the daughters especially wouldn't have known that much about it from a firsthand perspective since they were so young when it ended, but they're going to grow up under the shadow of this. And also hopefully just push Josie also towards being able to see it from a bigger perspective and also understand her own relationship with her mom from a different angle as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I loved the sisterhood between, it was her and Kate and Isabel. I really liked how they, you know, kind of bonded together and went on this journey, you know, really of their own and said, okay, we want to learn more. We want to help Josie, but we also want to kind of learn more about our story and our mothers and how they got to be where they are. So I really liked that she was able to forge that relationship because it really seemed as though before then she was very much of a loner, right? That I didn't hear much about her having friends or that kind of thing. She was just, you know, kind of like she was kind of off on her own. So it was nice to kind of see her have that relationship.
I want to jump in really quick.
Sure, absolutely.
I was going to say, I was really mad at you yesterday, Sarah, because when I was reading the ending and the mom got shot in the head and I was like, there's no way they can bring her back. I was like, I'm so upset. I don't know how I'm going to go to the meeting tomorrow and not be like, how could you do that? But I was so happy when they brought her back because it was just like the whole time Josie finally realized who her mother really is and her real story, everything, you know, everything she thought she knew about her mom and everything she thought she knew about her dad, Dr. Bellinger, was totally wrong. And so I was like, to now have this new start for them after all this trauma and loss and rearrangement of their world. And I was just like, and now they don't get that. I was so sad. And then I was very happy. But there was that moment where I was just like, I can't go to this thing tomorrow. Like, I'm going to be like, why would you do that to me? Why would you do that to me? But obviously it turns out the way, you know, us, the readers, I assume all wanted, but I was just very like, oh my gosh, like I want this new start for them, not just for Josie and her mom, but then for the girls too, because they all seem, like you said, very connected now. I mean, Kate and Josie have their outside of this sisterhood feeling now, like they're kind of on their own. But then they also have reconnected with the, you know, remaining moms and daughters. So I just, in my head, I just see such a different future for them and, you know, potentially really full of, you know, that kind of family feeling and full of love. And so I was just like, no, she can't die. Like, that can't happen. But anyways, I wanted to comment on that. I don't know if I really had a question, but I guess my question with that though is there, I mean, I don't think there is, but is there any kind of sequel? And if not, kind of what do you envision for these characters now that the book is done? Like, are they all going to remain connected? Are they all going to live together? I'm forgetting her name right now. I think it was Helen, but then her new name was something different. But she's one of the remaining girls as well, and her mom's one of the remaining moms. Do you think they're gonna reconnect with them? Because she had mentioned like in the future, you come find me. But I just kind of am wondering, like, even if there's not a sequel, what do you envision as like where they are now?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry for scaring you like that. But I'm glad you came to the meeting anyway. Right now, I don't have like a sequel planned right now. I've just turned in a third book that's like more standalone. But I have thought a lot about what their futures would look like. I do think that they would stay connected, especially Josie and Kate. I think, I always pictured Isabel and Margaret having kind of a close relationship in a way because Isabel has lost her mom and Margaret, was in love with Patricia. So I felt like maybe the two of them would find a new bond as well. I feel like Josie might have a little bit of a difficult journey in a way because I do feel like she has the flaws of maybe being a little bit unwilling to listen to other people. She, in a strange way, she has some of the same flaws that like Bellinger had. So I think she would have to kind of work towards overcoming that in the future. Now that they are open about the fact that they have these abilities, I think it would be really intriguing to write a sequel because in this one, everything has been so like, it's been kind of something that they've been able to discover about themselves. And it's been a little more private and individual. But if it was something that the world knew about on a much larger scale, I think it would have really interesting and far-reaching repercussions, which would make writing a sequel feel both very fun and very intimidating. But I do picture them, like returning to a sense of being close-knit, like they had at the homestead, but hopefully also holding on to their individuality as well. And maybe not, I feel like some of the dynamics at the homestead originally might have been like a little unhealthy. So hopefully they would work on that a bit.
Do you think that Tom or Junior would end up coming back at all? I thought that he might have some sort of, besides the phone call, helping them find Dr. Bellinger's new homestead, I guess. Do you think he would come back in the second one? I had that moment where I was reading, my boyfriend and I like to read together, but different books. And I was like, I always will stop and be like, okay, this is my prediction. You have no idea what I'm talking about. But I think Tom is Junior. And I figured out Junior because of I don't know why I thought it was Junior over the older sibling, but I had that moment. And then, a little while later, I was like, I knew it. And he's like, okay, sure you did. But I had that moment and I was just so excited that I figured it out. But then I was also kind of like, I didn't dislike him. I know that I understood their anger towards him for not telling the truth and for having a very different reason for being on this journey with them than writing a book or that being the only thing as an outside observer. But I also kind of felt like I felt for him because when you think about him and his position with this family growing up, it must have been very difficult to see your dad kind of leave you behind and go form this new sort of family and be lost in that. And so I don't know, I had more empathy for him. So I kind of, in a way, wish they would connect again and make kind of a new relationship. But I'm just curious what you think that would look like if beyond this book.
I'm glad to hear that you had some empathy for Tom because I actually like him as well. He's definitely a very flawed character, but I feel like a lot of the characters in the book are a bit flawed. And I think that while he was, sometimes quite deceitful, I didn't want him to come across as an entirely unlikable character or someone who's villainous, because I do think that he had like these really profound things happening in his past. Like he understandably, you know, grew up with this fascination towards the homestead because it had been his you know, apparently lost dad's work. Which maybe made him come at it from like a slightly selfish angle. But I think that over the course of the journey, I think that he did come to understand how, even if they were affected by his dad, by Dr. Bellinger to some extent, of course, they were like completely individual people who each had their own complex journeys. And I would like to see Tom have a little bit of that redemption arc and hopefully overcome some of the things that his dad was unable to overcome, and, you know, maybe slowly be able to re-earn their trust and have a more positive role in their lives again. So yeah, I would like to see Tom continue in a more positive way.
Yeah.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad you said that, Nicole, because I thought the same thing. When they kicked Tom out, I was like, I mean, I understand, but
Yeah.
come on.
Yeah, he wasn't spiteful, and I feel like he had a right that he could be spiteful towards them, even though it wasn't their fault. But you know, human nature of the loss of your dad, the reason he thought he died, and just being taken away from his family, like all of his time was consumed into this project. So he very easily could have been spiteful, and I never got that from him. So I just kind of, you know, I felt for him. I kind of wanted to give him a little hug, you know, like he had his own journey and his own trauma from it. So
Yeah. Ashley said the same
Yeah.
thing. She thought Tom wasn't a villain, and she felt the same way that he, you know, she was empathetic towards him. So poor Tom.
Yeah.
I want to know his reaction finding out that his dad was alive and then died. Like, I also want to know
Yeah.
what that would be like for him. And I mean, I guess his family too, but yeah, I don't know. Just interesting, like things to think about after the end. Like, oh gosh, now how are they going to have to reach out to him and say, hey, well, we found him, but we also killed him. Sorry. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, that does add an interesting wrinkle to Josie and Tom's friendship or relationship if she actually did end up killing his dad. That
yeah.
Listen, we're trying to push you to do the sequel. We're trying to push you
I
as
know.
much as
yeah. I know
tell?
it's kind of working. I'm like, now you have me thinking about it a lot. I'm like, ooh, this could be pretty juicy.
there's
Yeah.
so much material. I also thought a lot about I fought a lot for Josie when she was sitting down with Dr. Bellinger, and all started to kind of you could almost see the wheels turning, and she was like, oh God, like he isn't who I thought he was. My mother wasn't who. This work that I'm doing and trying to continue Dr. Bellinger's work, it's not what I mean. So I could almost feel myself sitting there with her and being like, oh gosh, this has got to be so devastating for her entire life to think a certain way and kind of build her character and her work and everything around it, to understand that it was really all, you know, it was really all a lie. She didn't, you know, she didn't know all the details, and a lot was withheld from her. But there was a lot of, at least I had a lot of empathy for her in that scene. That had to have been a tough scene to write. What were you trying to get across in that scene? Was it sort of what I was kind of describing there, which is, oh gosh, this has got to be really, really heavy for her, trying to figure it all out, especially after she's learned, you know, this, however long it was that they were on the journey looking for her mom, and then they find her, and then there's this other big, you know, revelation about Dr. Bellinger being alive, and then him, you know, really, you know, mistreating these women, and there's a whole nother like commune or something there. So there's all this stuff that is happening.
That was a tough scene to write. I feel like I've said this about like every scene, which is maybe like a sign of what my writing process is. But it felt very profound because he's been this figure in her life who's kind of guided her decisions and formed her understanding of herself and her place in the world, but very much filtered through like her own interpretation. And now she's actually seeing him as the person that he is, which is not something she really ever expected. And if she did fantasize about it, you know, it would have been like a much more positive, affirming experience instead of completely gut-wrenching and like being forced to admit that she had spent her life kind of understanding herself and pouring all this like admiration towards somebody who ended up not really being deserving of it. Part of what I was thinking about was maybe just the way that I feel throughout the past, probably decade or so. I feel like there have just been like a lot of revelations about people who have maybe been very beloved on kind of a larger scale, and just kind of contending with like, oh wait, like these people that we maybe thought were one way, like where we kind of saw their good qualities, have ended up being like quite terrible, to put it mildly in some cases. Like when I was like a teenager, I remember really enjoying like Woody Allen's movies, because there was so much self-deprecating humor, and I found it like very funny and relatable to kind of just like make yourself the butt of a joke like that so much. And then of course, like now I can't even remember when I first learned like more about, what he really did to like people who were reliant on him, and just like these terrible, terrible things like that completely blew apart my understanding of him. But yeah, it's just that strange moment where you kind of have to look at somebody that you maybe idolized when you were younger, and there's that moment where you feel like, well, I feel kind of betrayed by this person. And then I also kind of have to look at myself and wonder like, well, why am I maybe quick to like really admire certain people? Like maybe I need to look at the world with a different lens and kind of contend with that in myself too. So even though it was like a much more personal experience for Josie, I guess I was thinking of that way, that when somebody you've really looked up to turns out to be someone who really doesn't reflect the values that you hold dear, somebody who's caused great harm, like it both makes you question them, and also to a smaller extent, but a still important extent, kind of like question yourself a little bit and realize like, maybe I tend to admire people who like didn't really deserve that admiration, and maybe there are other people in my life or in the world who really do deserve a lot of admiration and respect, who are overlooked, and I should be like shifting my focus in that way. So I think that kind of informed a lot of that final scene, as well as like her overall arc towards kind of seeing Bellinger in a different light. Yeah.
And talking about overlooking people, I mean, her mother, we learn a lot about her involvement and how she really was the impetus for all that, right? Josie thinks it's Dr. Bellinger and it's all him and he's the reason for this. And then we sort of learn that really this was Margaret's idea in the beginning, and she was the reason for kind of bringing them, bringing them all together, but things turned out a lot differently than Margaret expected for them to be. So I assume that was also part of Josie's journey, right? Was figuring out where her mother stood and the whole scheme of things, and being able to maybe just reshift, as you were talking about who you're idolizing, who you're looking up to, maybe reshift that focus and look at her mother in a different light.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I wanted it to kind of have that balance as well, where it wasn't just a moment of like disappointment or betrayal, but there was another aspect to it as well, where even if there was like a level of sorrow or like anger at herself, for not appreciating some of the people in her life, it also leads to a sense of like, here's this new, not really a new relationship, but here's like a new angle to this relationship I've had all my life, where now I can, now I have this chance to see them more honestly or see them more respectfully, and like we can grow and change in the future too. So yeah, I hope that there was a sense of there was a sense of hope as well, especially through the lens of Margaret.
Yeah. So we were talking about this. We do kind of group chats along while we're reading the book, and we were talking a little bit about the different powers of the girls. Which one? I'd love to hear which is your favorite power?
Ooh, that's a really good question. That is a tough question. I feel like I should really want Kate's, because I feel like hers is the one that could do the most concrete good in the world. I think she's one of the few who has a power that really has no real potential for harm. Like, she is the one who kind of puts things back together and heals, and all of the rest, like, they could use it for good, or they could definitely use it for harm. So I really enjoyed hers. I enjoyed writing hers. There is something like a little bit compelling about Josie's. Like, it was very fun to write, but I think that if I actually had it, it would be a little bit frightening. Like, it will probably be very fun at first, but then, like, you have to realize, like, oh, I have this responsibility now where, like, I'm going to end up making people do things, if I'm not mindful of the way I talk, like, and that would be that. So it would probably be very difficult. Now I'm really thinking about this. Maybe I would land on Kate's overall. I don't know. Do any of you have one that, like, really spoke to you?
I like the one that she stares in your eye. You can she look in the eyes and pretty much get her answer that she wants. I really like that character.
Josie?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that one a lot too.
Yeah. To force people to tell the truth. I like that.
Yeah.
I agree with healing, though. I think that's the one I would want. I think in their situation, it doesn't help them to defend themselves as easily, but at the same time, it's like a security. As long as she's okay, she can help heal others if they get hurt. And like you said, it is the most, like, positive one. And just the fact that she can bring people back from the dead is kind of just amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do like that.
I think Kate's was my favorite at first too, with the healing. But there is something really compelling about Isabel's power too, being able to just burn everything down. I mean,
Yeah. I can totally see that. Yeah.
I thought it was cool. We were talking also a little bit in the chat about the powers seeming to, like, get stronger, or to really the girls really realizing those powers when they were, like, together as they went kind of further on their journey. Because we saw, like, Isabel, her mother kept saying, oh, we don't know what her power is, we're trying to figure it out. And then Josie, she started, you could see little pieces of it, and then it sort of got stronger it seemed to got stronger when she was with the other women. What was that the intent, is that as they got closer that their, the girls' powers sort of materialized or got stronger, or what was it that got them to kind of come into understanding what they were capable of?
It was the intention, yeah, to have them kind of uncover more of their powers and learn more about their powers as they were close to each other.
Yeah.
I think it was really my editor who, like, probably in one of the later drafts was really wanting to emphasize that, because in some of my earlier drafts, I feel like Josie in particular, she did become stronger, but it was just, as she accepted it more and more. And I think my editor really pushed me as well to explore, like, how maybe we already have Josie changing so much in kind of her view of the world and in her personality or her understanding of herself as she meets these other women from her past. And, wouldn't it be fitting in a lot of ways for her abilities to also become more strong and more clarified as she is spending time with these other women who experience their own power in different ways, you know, from Kate, who's like kind of always seen it as part of herself, and it's not as shocking or surprising to her, like she's more matter of fact about it, to other people who, you know, like Isabel, who kind of has this she really craved it so strongly, but now that she has it, maybe it is a little bit outside of her control as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a very intentional move to kind of have them become more powerful as they were around each other, and to kind of trigger that reaction in each other, which hopefully, you know, kind of paralleled the emotional side of things as well.
Yeah. Did this have to take place in the 70s from your viewpoint? We talked a little bit about that as well. Was that important? Could it have taken place now, or do you think it had to have taken place at some point in the past?
The 70s always stood out to me really strongly because I think that was sort of the peak of when there really were communities like this, and when women were maybe more interested in parthenogenesis. As I discovered, like, this wasn't entirely speculative, like the superpowers are, I assume. I mean, maybe people are just keeping secrets, but the aspect of women coming together and thinking like, hey, maybe we could reproduce on our own, and just kind of the general back to the land, like gathering in the forest kind of aspect of it. I think that really was happening back in the 70s. And also that was when Louise Brown, like the first baby born successfully via IVF, she was born, like, and now I can't quite, I think it was 1974, but I used to have it memorized, and now it's out of my head. But yeah, it was in the 70s as well. So I think that was kind of a big leap forward in terms of our understanding of like reproductive technology. And Louise Brown really did get a lot of pushback from that. You know, she had people like kind of harassing her family. She had people, I think there was even like a tabloid piece where people said that Louise Brown had like telekinetic powers just because she was born via IVF. And at the time, this was like so new, and it kind of disrupted our understanding of, you know, how reproduction should work. And I guess it felt very sci-fi, or like, oh, are we like meddling in things we shouldn't meddle in, which seems very weird now because IVF is very common and very widely accepted at this point, like 50 odd years later. But it felt like in the 70s there was a focus on reproduction, kind of reproductive technology, and a focus on like women maybe gathering together and seeing if they could accomplish this on their own. So it really felt like the perfect time to me, that kind of made sense in terms of our actual history and what was going on back then.
Yeah, I did appreciate like the throwbacks to like going into like a phone booth, and when Josie had to make the call, and I was like, oh my gosh, a phone booth.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was nostalgic.
Yeah, that was kind of a fun a fun sort of throwback. So I know you said you were talking a little bit about another novel that you have sort of coming out, or that they're finishing up now. What are you looking forward to in the future work wise? What sort of things are you getting into while writing wise or career wise that we can look out for from you?
Well, my third book, I think it's still in very early stages in terms of like ironing out all these details. I think it should be coming out next July, which feels like both far away and very close. That one focuses more on the Arkansas Ozarks, where I am actually from. Like, I think Kate lives there in the book. In Girl One, and this focuses, you know, entirely on like a little town in the Arkansas Ozarks. It's 6 friends who as teenagers uncover like very strange powers in the houses throughout the Ozarks. It kind of leads to a tragedy that sends them scattering, except for one friend who stays behind, 15 years later, they receive a cryptic letter from this friend who stayed behind and are pulled back and kind of sucked back into these mysteries that they have left in their wake. And that one was it was a lot of fun to write because I feel like it's not super similar to Girl One in some ways. It's probably more fantasy than sci-fi in a lot of ways, but it's still very speculative, where it kind of merges a little bit of thriller and a little bit of fantasy. So hopefully, I will have more concrete news to share about that one soon. In terms of longer term, I mean, now you have me thinking a lot about a sequel.
Nicole is so excited.
So I would love to return to that world and see how I could flesh it out, especially now that these powers are not a secret but are out in the open.
Yeah.
I love writing speculative fiction just because I like having things kind of mostly realistic, but one or two things are a little bit different. So, fingers crossed I can continue to focus on that.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I would love to see this like on a screen, like a movie or a series would be just absolutely amazing.
That was the other thing I was
would
going
love
to
to.
say. I would love that.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun to watch, right? Like to tune in and be like, oh, this is happening. This is happening. That would be fun.
Yeah, I would love that as well. So, fingers crossed on that too.
Yeah, they're just putting little bugs in your ears, seeing what seeing what happens. Before we let Sarah go, and I know we just have a few minutes left. I just wanted to open the floor and see if there were any questions or comments anybody wanted to make before we adjourn for the day.
Sarah, I just wanted to let you know I enjoyed your book. That's all I want to tell you. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for reading.
I agree. It was a very fun, it was really fun. It was fun to sort of see how the characters ended up. And I am getting more and more into kind of the speculative fiction. Sci-fi, like complete sci-fi is hard for me to just situate my brain into, but the speculative has enough of the like supernatural where it's like, ooh, but not so much of the technology or the really, all the details that I get lost in. So for me, this is a great space because I'm like, yes, I kind of get the best of both worlds. So I'm really sort of enjoying this sort of a genre in general.
Oh, awesome. I love it too.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to hear that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, before we go, if you don't mind, I want to take a quick photograph of us with our books, if you guys have them with you.
Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. And let me see if I can get it to work. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Thank you again, Sarah. Thank you so very much for joining us today. If you guys enjoyed Sarah's book, I'm sure she would appreciate if you guys would write a review on wherever she is. I'm sure she's all over. We will see you guys next month for Memo from, I don't remember the name of the book.
Turner,
there it was. So who's the Memo from Turner? We will see you guys next week and enjoy your long holiday weekend coming up.
Thank you,
Sarah.
Sarah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Ashley's still there? Ashley's still there?
Yes.
She's gone.
Yeah, she's there.
Hi, Ash. I just wanted to let you know, thank you so very much for your tips last week about traveling with the cat.
It worked. It worked.
Yes.
It worked. Yeah.
It did. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Okay.
See you
All right,
guys.
guys. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.